Hi guys, this week I want to talk about the paradigm shift between having your documents on a server in your office that you own and having them in the cloud, potentially on a shared drive that you don't. So let's get into it. So this week I wanted to cover a topic that's quite interesting and has come up in a recent project that we've done for a customer, whereby they're moving from a traditional setup where you have files on your internal network, generally on a shared drive in your server, and you communicate with your customers or collaborate with your customers and your clients by emailing documents back and forth. This is the traditional way of doing things. Now, people who use Google and who use other collaborative tools will be used to being able to collaborate with other people on documents in a shared folder of some description. And this was possible within my drive. But what was different about that was if you placed a document into that shared folder, you actually still maintained ownership of it. It was shared with everybody else, but the ownership of the file still remained with you. So you could have company A that has Google Drive and company B that has Google Drive, and they could both place documents into a shared drive or shared folder, owned by, say, company A. But the document ownership would be maintained with the individual users within those companies. Now we've moved to a world where we have shared drives in Google. And this is quite interesting because it means that there's a mind shift or a paradigm shift that has to happen in how companies actually interact with each other. And as I said, we've gone through this quite recently with a customer, and I've also experienced it personally myself where I lost access to a file. And that's really what I want to cover. So the first and second scenario, there are kind of three scenarios. And the first and second scenario are where you own the shared drive. So your company sets up a shared drive and they have it internally. It's for internal use only. You know, your HR documents, your policies, that's fine, okay? And there's no problem with doing that. There's no, if it's set up correctly, there's no security issues, or, you know, you can make sure no one can share documents externally, all that kind of stuff that we've covered in previous videos. Then the next level is where you have a shared drive that you're adding a client to, or an external party that maybe you work with. So maybe a contractor, for example. In this scenario, you still have quite a bit of control. So if you set up the documents or the shared drive correctly, the documents and files within it are quite safe and secure, depending on the level of permission that you give that external party. So you could give them full access and they would be able to move files or folders out of your shared drive, and that probably wouldn't be recommended. If you just gave them the ability to add files and edit files but not be able to make any major changes, then you would be quite safe, and that's what we would probably recommend in most scenarios. Now the third sort of scenario is where you're collaborating with another company that also has G Suite. So you're working with us, with Damson Cloud, and you have G Suite and we have G Suite. Who should set up the shared drive? Because whoever does, that is the company that maintains ownership of the files and folders that are already in the shared drive and any that will be placed into it, even ones that you might have created if we were to have created the shared drive, and vice versa. So this creates a little bit of a conundrum for companies where they're actually potentially accessing, or potentially they are accessing, another organization's shared drive or server in the cloud, for want of a better description. And that means that the permissions and the ownership, and ownership is really what I want to emphasize here, is of that other company. So if I'm an end user and I place a document that's owned by Damson Cloud into my customer shared drive, it is now owned by my customer. And that means that they have the ability to remove my access. And that is actually what happened to me with a document that I had, where I was had access to it through a shared drive, and the customer removed external sharing completely. And so that meant anybody who was on a shared drive that was external was automatically removed. And that was obviously a policy change within the organization, and I lost access to that folder, that shared drive, and I lost access to all the documents within it. Now, as it happened, I didn't actually have a copy of those documents, because another sort of unknown or caveat that people should know is that when you run a backup with a backup solution, like AFI or Spanning or Backupify, it only backs up your documents that you own. So it doesn't back up documents that aren't owned by your organization. And so I didn't have another copy of it. I would have to have manually made a copy of that document. Now, in this particular scenario, I was able to contact the customer and get access to the files again and get a copy of them. They were actually ones we had created, so no arguments there from anybody. But I think the shift really means that companies need to think about this. When, collaborating in the cloud is great and it adds lots of amazing capabilities, but what does it look like in terms of the contracts and agreements that you have in place with your customers, your clients, your contractors? And if there's a conflict, what do you do? If your policy is that you always create the shared drive, which is what we recommend to our customers, that they always create the shared drive and they maintain ownership and control, what happens when you come across another company that's also their policy? That's a little bit of as I said, a paradigm shift, and a contractual agreement maybe needs to be put in place, is what I would probably recommend, that says, if we're accessing files or folders on your shared drive, we need to be able to maintain access to them, or we need to be allowed to take a copy of them if, for example, we're a company that's giving you advice, and I'm putting the advice into the document and suddenly I lose access to it. I now have no record of the advice that I've given if I haven't taken a copy of it. So certainly having some agreement with your external parties that you're dealing with would be good, but also thinking about your internal processes. And if you do have a situation where you're accessing an externally shared drive, too many sharings in there, then you need to have maybe a procedure in place that says at a particular time in the project, or every so often, end of the week, a copy of that document is maintained within your internal shared solution. And I think that's probably the only way to mitigate against the risk of losing access to files, other than maybe the contractual or legal agreement that you might have in place. And definitely it's something we're thinking about with our own customers, that this is something that we would have in place during a project, just so if something was to happen, such as a company changing their policies, that we would be able to at least contact them and say, hey, is it okay if we, or we have it in the agreement that, we can have a copy of those documents, if you could just send those to us or share those with us again. And I think it is going to take a while for companies to figure this out. And I think there's going to be a lot of concerns for legal teams, for risk management teams. I think that in the long run, I see potentially some sort of joint shared environment that Microsoft or Google or any of these collaborative companies that are making these tools might think about doing. So you might be able to create a space that's actually owned by both companies, and almost like an escrow account that your files or folders could stay in. I certainly think that would be a good idea, but it doesn't exist yet as far as I'm aware. So that is it from me. I would be really interested to know what you think of this topic, and I think it might be a controversial one. Is controversial maybe the wrong word? And certainly one that people are going to have their opinions about, and I would be love to hear from people about what they feel some of the scenarios are, maybe some that I haven't thought of, and what some of the solutions might be.